Good evening and you're welcome to PM Express, our first edition for the year 2020. And what is it was a good time for us to talk about strategy and plan for the year? How do you start it right to ensure that you end on a good note? Strategizing for 2020. That's what we'll be discussing on PM Express. We'll be right back after this break. Well, let's set the ball rolling on business edition of PM Express as you look at strategy. How do you start it right in terms of your planning to ensure that you end on a good note? That's what we're talking about on business edition of PM Express. And I have no other person to talk about strategy planning than David Ofosu-Dorte. He is a senior partner at ABN. David, and sir, thank you so much for joining us on PM Express this evening.
Thank you, George.
And for every serious company, maybe they have their plan already in place. When you talk about planning, strategizing, is it too late for a George Yafi and go to talk about strategy at this time of the year?
No, it's never too late. I mean, and when you talk about strategy or when you plan your strategy, depends entirely on your own strategy cycle and also on events which are outside your ability to control. So even if you plan your strategy a year ahead, remember that certain events can occur that you don't have control over. So let's assume that we completely strategize to have a program today. And let's assume there was fire announcement right now. We have to get out of this place. Our strategy will be completely disrupted. So the whole thing depends on how long your own planning time frame is and what your response time is when events outside your control happens. Which is why good strategies actually follow strategic planning tools. But that's another, part of the discussion I'm sure we can get into. But as to whether the timing is right or not is entirely dependent on your planning cycle. And let me just illustrate. If, for example, your planning cycle and your financial year is January 1 to 31st December, then clearly you may want to plan your strategy a couple of months before the year begins.
The last quarter of the preceding year.
But I've seen many people plan at the beginning of the year. There is nothing wrong with that. It means that they are going to lose a few more days at the beginning of the year in the implementation. But you can't catch up. And also, no matter how well and you have planned in advance, as I indicated, events do happen, and you need to constantly, as it were, adjust the strategy to fit things which you could not predict or things which came outside your control.
So can we now look at how do you adjust or tweak the strategy as you open the year to ensure that you end on a good note? Because at least there should be something in place by now. So tweaking that strategy to ensure that you start on a good note, what should go into this thing? How should you go about it?
I think the issue is not how you tweak the strategy. The issue is how you develop the strategy in the first place. And I'm not recommending necessarily that everybody follows the strict laid down strategy planning tools, but two tools are very important to talk about. One is the so-called PESTEL, because if you are talking about businesses and organizations, the PESTEL tool.
Where the PESTEL is.
I'll explain what the PESTEL is. So they will look at the political issues, whether they look at it as it moves on or as they look at it in advance. Either way is entirely up to them. But they will look at political issues as number one, which is the first P. So let's say NDC, MPP, one of them is likely to win the next election.
Because of the way the polls are going right now.
Well, that's been the history. Okay. And businesses plan according to historical perspective and project. I do not think that they would expect the party which had, let's say, 2% in the last election to be able to suddenly win. But anything can happen. Okay. So you look at political issues, which of them wins, and when they win, what are their political inclination? For example, would they continue previous projects? Would they initiate new projects? Would those projects affect what you were doing in your planning cycle? The second part of the tool, the E, is economic issues. What are the economic issues that are going to happen over the next 1 year that you need to factor into account? So, for example, France and Ivory Coast announced suddenly that they are going to change the CFA to ECO. How does it affect you? If you're exporting to a francophone country, how does the change from CFA to ECO change any of the dynamics? How does the pegging of the ECO, if they do start it, to the euro affect you? And how does it affect your relationship of your currency to the dollar? These are real factors, economic factors you need to take into account. Or even if you take Ghana, and let's say that you have AFCFTA coming up, and you want to look at the potential of exports across Africa. And you see that interest rate in Kenya has dropped from 18 to 12% over the last 1.5 years. And Ghana interest rate, notwithstanding the MPC dropping the interest rate, is still region of 20s. How will that affect your borrowing ability and your cost of production over the next 1 year? So these are economic factors that you need to take into account. And then you come to social factors. So if you take, for example, your group of people who buy your products are in the youth category. Let's say they are below 30. I've asked a simple question at presentations I've made, that if you have a brother or sister who is 30 or below, or a son who is, or daughter who is 30 or below, just ask them when was the last time they picked taxi. And you find out the answer is almost zero. Everybody picks, yes, they are doing Uber.
It's more comfortable.
Yeah, so if you are actually in serving that category, how does the trend of moving from taxi to Uber, or purchasing on social media or platforms, or advertising on Instagram, or delivery through mobile motorcycles, etc., affect your supply? So if you don't have a mobile payment platform, the demographics and the social change is affecting your business without you recognizing. Or if you run a big taxi service in Accra, you may not realize that by the time these people get to 50, taxi services may not exist in Accra, as an example. So social demographic or social dynamics and change is a factor. The T is technology, and I've mentioned an example of technology as an example. Let's say you're a manufacturer, and you can't realize that with the fourth industrial revolution, you have Internet of Things affecting everything and how items talk to each other. You are not applying what is changing to your strategy and your production cycle. Environment, legal issues. Which are the laws which are going to change? I saw some of the companies who struggled last year, not only in Ghana, but in a number of African countries when laws change. But these bills, they are not just passed overnight. They are laid before Parliament. There's a business impact of every bill that is laid before Parliament. People debate it. And yet, some companies get, as it were, taken unawares by the change in the basic legislation. So if you look at all these pestle tools, the likelihood of your being surprised is very little. And there is an important point to make. If you strategize very well, you can take advantage of opportunity much better than those who do not. It's like the parable of the 10 virgins. But if you also strategize very well, and even the effect is bad, it affects you lesser than those who did not strategize. I think that's how life is actually.
So I'll ask you that in our part of the world, and in part of our world, does it work when even force majeure, when it rains even for just 30 minutes, the road networks are bad and everything, does it pay to plan?
That is actually
the part of our world compared to the well-developed economies, when you know that all other things being equal, for the next 1 week, this is how things are going to be. Things are fairly stable, prices and all those things. In a part of a world where every second something is changing, maybe you just have to look at, obey the wind and then act.
No. I would have thought that is the more reason to plan. Because here, it is more difficult to predict. That is the more reason why you actually have to plan. And the more information you have, the more likely you come close to the ability to predict things right. And I gave an example of doing, impact analysis of change in laws. And I can give you an ensemble of number of laws, some of which have been in Parliament for about 20 years, and I know this is not going to get passed. Or even if it gets passed, it's not going to affect your business that much. So don't bother about it. But this is likely to happen because you can connect the dots. And any good strategies can look at a number of otherwise unconnected things and connect the dots. And it gives you that right conceptual skill. So in an environment like ours, that is actually the more reason why you should plan. And every day when you listen to the news, for example, and let's say the weather, you're giving, there's a weather forecast. You may say Meteo will get it wrong, but Meteo may get it right. And what that means is that if you live in a flood-prone area, the proper way to plan is to ensure that your insurance cover for flood is taken. Because if you don't, and you decide to live by the day because it's difficult to predict and there is flood, your business is going to go down because you wouldn't have that insurance cover. This is actually the place where you need planning more.
For a lot of local firms here in Ghana, even for the multinationals, again, what should be the approach to regulatory interventions and political actions and all the rest? And again, in your talk, you talked about how certain multinationals even struggled to regulatory actions and even political decisions, when we knew that from the beginning of the year, a tax was supposed to be implemented? Maybe the companies thought that, oh, we can lobby to stay that action and all the rest. And then, bam, the action came. And you saw how these companies were struggling to comply with that measure.
So I wasn't making specific reference to CST or any of those, those issues. but I mean, in a good environment where strategy works, one of the issues you look at is the L in the strategy cycle. And the L, as I indicated, are the legal issues which are likely to change. And I indicated, unless a law was passed by the certificate of agency, and even that, the minimum we are looking at is a period of about 2 weeks. It will leave cabinet and go to cabinet, and the certificate of agency may be passed within 3 weeks to within 3 days to a week. Even that, there is some amount of predictability. So yes, there are circumstances which will occur no matter how well you plan, which are beyond your control. And I'm saying all that requires is for you to then begin to adjust. What do I do in these circumstances? So let's take the dollar to cedi.
Yeah.
There are some people who actually pegged their plan at 6 cedis to
end of year.
End of year. Yeah. So as a result, much as the dollar inched past 5, they were not that bothered. They will be bothered as soon as it begins to cross 5.5, and they are like, hey, our benchmark is going to be in the crystal ball prediction that I made at the beginning of this year. One of the things I said about the Nigerian economy is it depends on whether or not the dollar, the cost of crude oil goes above or below 60. Because I just picked the Nigerian budget and looked at it, and Nigeria is very important to me because that's about 20% of our economy as Africa. So whatever happens to Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa is important to what happens to Ghana. And then we shouldn't treat Nigeria as if it's just any other country. Now, if Nigeria budget, I've scanned through it and I realized over 80% of that whole budget is based on crude oil, and the crude oil price for the budget was $60. Then I begin to watch what happens to the dollar price, because that what happens to the dollar price is what will happen to the Nigerian economy. It's as simple as that. Same thing when it comes to gold or cocoa or timber and oil now for Ghana. So these are significant factors you need to look at and monitor by the day as you listen to the news, how these impact on the economy and how that trickles down to your business as an individual entity.
I'm going to ask you a question where I know you, I'll find your response as interesting. In drafting the strategy, in putting together the strategy, can I rely on the internal hands, or I should bring in these experts from outside to help me in putting it together?
You will find it strange, even though I'm a strategist and I speak a lot on strategy and I go to a lot of corporate boardrooms and talk about strategy. I don't believe anybody can plan your strategy for you.
Wow.
So I don't develop strategy for people, no. I believe that
10 ways to become this, 70 ways to do this, 5 ways to do this.
So all those things do for me is they should provide you enough information as to what to look at, which informs you in order for you to develop your own strategy. Because you have to own it. And that's one of the problems that we do have in this part of the world, where at times, part of the things we implement in the economy is actually developed from outside.
Outside, yeah.
We don't own it. What you should get is adequate information, and based on that information, you then develop your strategy, because no matter how hard you try, strategy is context specific, and nobody can feel the way George you are sitting in this seat the way you feel. I may tell you the economics of sitting and all that. At the end of the day, you are the one in that seat. So yes, you do need experts who understand what strategy is, who have enough conceptual skills to be able to connect the dots, who can guide you as to what to look at, and who can tell you the things which are as it were, the post to be benchmarking as you go along with your strategy. But you have to develop the strategy yourself. If you don't, at the end of the day, somebody writes a strategy for you, charges you some amount of money, and goes away. And hey, he's not coming to implement that strategy for you. And you don't have to go far. We are in 2020, right? Sometime 25 years ago, there was big noise in this nation. I don't know how old you were then. Vision 2020, which started yesterday, and we were supposed to be the whole mark was. It was not just a middle-income country. It was Singapore. We were to become the next Singapore. We do know we are far away from Singapore, even though Singapore is less than the size of Accra. So essentially, you will find that strategy is, and Vision 2020 was a very good strategy, by the way, extremely good strategy. If you took Jerry Rawlins's picture away and went back and looked at all the principles and depoliticized it, you will find that the benchmarks were the same that we found their way into GPRS and to all the things. And some of the things we are dealing with today, even in Ghana Beyond Aid, still go back to look at those same fundamental principles. So nothing has really changed. But we have not executed that. There's a difference between strategy development and strategy execution. So no matter how beautiful strategy is, if you don't execute it, forget it. That's why we are in 2020 now, and we've never realized the effect of Vision 2020 because we never implemented it. In fact, by 2000, even the very first 5 years target had all failed. So Ghana is very good at planning, and not only Ghana as a nation, a lot of corporate organizations are very good at planning but never implement. That is why you must develop your own strategy, own it, and have an implementation time frame.
I want to look at the externalities again, and I come back to the problem about what is on paper, the document, and how we should look at how to go about this and all those, because some will say that on paper we had this plan. Now things have changed around us and quickly we have to respond. How do you draw the line?
Are you referring to Vision 2020 in particular?
No, I'm talking about even a company that George Afia and Co had a plan, a strategy going into this year. This is how we want to recruit. We wake up one morning and maybe 10 people have actually gone off. How do you respond to these things that happen all of a sudden, even though on paper this is what has worked for the business over the past 10 years? Now the reality is that you have things happening on the spur of the moment that you also have to respond, and you are struggling between sticking to the paper and then acting right now to save the business from collapsing.
But strategy is not everything. It is just one of the many things a company has to do. So we should not turn strategy into a god. It is a key guidepost that you use to guide what you
I say that because some business, this is how we do things here. This is our plan. This is our strategy. You can't change it. This is the winning team. You can't change it.
Okay. Let me say this. I don't know if you've heard it before. Culture trounces strategy. And I've been saying that over and over anywhere I speak about strategy. Culture trounces strategy. As Peter Drucker puts it, culture is strategy for breakfast. Actually, culture is more important than strategy. So if you go into an organization which says, this is how we do things, that organization is simply got the wrong culture. It is a kind of organization that does not respond to reality. That is why one of the tools of strategy people often use is what is called SWOT. And you see that the SWOT is looking at strengths, weaknesses, which is internal, and opportunities and threats. But the part about the SW, which is the strengths and weaknesses, is that a lot of people are not dispassionate when they are looking at it. So when you realize in the company that something is going wrong and it's pointed out to you, and I'm like, this is how we have done things, you are not looking at it dispassionately. You are looking at it from a historical legacy perspective. That's how I have done things. So it doesn't matter what else is the threat or what else is the opportunity. Let me stick to what I'm doing. But that's not different from how politicians look at things. This is how our manifesto is, and this is how we will do it, irrespective of the reality that faces us. So that's how some people behave. But pragmatists and practical companies which survive the storm look at the reality, dispassionately step back and decide that we are going to. That is why you find that when it comes to strategy implementation, there are those who do quarterly meetings, monthly meetings, half-yearly meetings, and actually get an external resource person to benchmark what they said they will achieve. So they score them and say, this is what you said you were going to do, and this is what you did not do. These were the shortfalls. Then the company then picks it. I mean, in our own account language, you say the Ocha Kwanim and the Chia. So definitely you bring in the external person to benchmark you again, and it helps you correct your errors and move forward. So this business about this is how we do things is a cultural issue, not a strategy issue. Therefore, a strategy, when you put a strategy in place without looking at the culture of the organization and how to address the shortcomings, you've actually wasted your time. The strategy is irrelevant without culture, being addressed. The other point which is worth noting is that you need to have systems in an organization at any point in time. Because no matter how much the turbulence is, it is the systems which will enable you survive or will enable you stand. There are times you go through real turbulence, but if the systems are strong, you realize that over a period, you kind of weather the storm as it were and move forward.
Aren't these systems working, or aren't these systems going to work in those formalized multinationals? What about the normal local companies as well? Can we establish these systems?
I think we're getting it wrong. Not to cut you, we're getting it wrong. Strategy is not about formal organizations. Everybody strategizes every day.
Okay.
If somebody is going to have a 50th birthday or a 30th birthday, they plan. They call an event planner where to put the stand. I mean, where people will eat, where they will walk. We strategize for that. Similarly, if somebody wants to have a wedding, I mean, Joy FM, you hold your wedding planning event, and people come, they choose they will even tell you what clothes to wear, etc. And this is done at times over a 6-month time frame. The churches will tell you to come for counseling and all the rest. Why do we strategize for all these things and we can't strategize for business? Is that formal? No, it's nothing to do with that. It's simply deciding that at the beginning of this year, I decided that I was going to sell A4 sheets. And how many A4 sheets do I sell? How many A4 sheets I sell would depend on what I sold last year, if I sold some last year. And depends on whether people still use A4. Or if having sold some before, my ability to understand that people still need A4. And where I buy my A4 from, and where I'm able to make a margin on the A4. I don't need to put it on paper. I don't need to understand pastel or SWOT. But I constantly strategize in my head. That is a fact. Everybody does that every single day, whether we like it or not. Some people formalize it. And in any event, strategy itself is a borrowed term from the military. Because the military always strategize on how to win a war, or how to maintain the victory they've won, or how to ward the enemy from coming. I mean, that's how it is. So people who studied military systems on how the military is able to gain advantage thought if you brought this to civil life and into industry, it may work. But it's happening around us all the time. Even if the military plans the best warfare strategy, and let's say the enemy attacked unannounced, they will still defend. But your ability to defend may depend on whether or not you were well positioned in your platoons and how the army was structured, or whether or not you were sleeping when the enemy attacked. Yeah.
This year is a peculiar one because of the 2020 elections. And would that change anything for a business, a multinational, a firm that over the past 3 years has been doing this in this way and is getting the results in terms of planning, in terms of implementation? Because some have said that elections sometimes breeds uncertainty. Even some people watching the polls, they're a little bit close. People are saying, okay, what should I do? And all the rest. People who have to bring in capital are trying to sit on the fence and see when they will act. Even in our bonds or secondary market, we have seen offshore investors reacting already. How should things go? How should you go about things being an election year? Should it change, or it should be business as usual?
Okay, 3 things come to mind immediately on that. First, it's again the culture of your business and the psyche. If you have a business which does not depend on which party is in power, and the business is structured in such a way that it doesn't depend, or you consciously make sure it doesn't depend, your problem is not as much as one which depends on which party is in power. And let me just illustrate. So if, for example, you were in the construction industry and you were wearing an NDC t-shirt or an MPP t-shirt, then as the election is getting near, you get jittery and you are monitoring who is likely to win or not. And you may even monitor 31st December and see what Ofosu Bempa is predicting, or what Obinim is predicting, or Nigel. Is that Prophet Nigel? Yeah, is predicting. And each of them will send shivers down your spine. So that's if you belong to that type of business. Or if your business popped up suddenly because of a political party in power, or lost because a political party lost power, that becomes part of your strategy. But if your business doesn't depend on that, it's apolitical, and doesn't depend on a party being in power, you nevertheless still watch the polls, because you are interested in whether what you are doing will be affected by what the party is seeking to do, or what they are already doing is going to continue. That's one part. So that's one part of how you look at elections. The other part is a business which is just from outside, especially the so-called FDIs. And I have had the chance to talk to them all the time, and I said, I have seen election cycles in Ghana since 1992, and the cycles are the same. In every election year, workers will go on strike or demand much more money. Some will demonstrate because they see it as their last chance. Opposition will come up with scandals. Government will come out with counter explanations. I say it happens every 4 years. There is nothing new. So if you're a multinational, that shouldn't scare you. I've seen people pack and leave Ghana on 5th December, hoping to come back. Some people think there will be war. No war is going to happen so far as I'm concerned. I mean, touch wood. Having said that, your planning cycle as a business should take into account that this is an election year and there is a well-determined expenditure pattern. It should also take into account the reality. For once, we do have an expenditure limit in law, which the government is not likely to exceed. So you can see that you take that context into account. So that's factor number 2. The factor number 3, for me, is to simply look at all the political parties. What are they likely to do based on what they themselves have said and on their history? And as a result, how do I plan for 2021? Remember, we are in 2020, not 2021. Yeah. And what do I do in 2020 to ensure that by 2021, I can still maintain the stability? These are the 3 factors that I think. And it doesn't matter which business you are in. Because whether you sell goods at Aboso or you are a multinational like Unilever or Coca-Cola, or you are George Wiafe planning to build a house next year, the price of cement and the dollar will be affected by the decisions politicians make. And the decisions politicians make will be affected by the manifestos and what they profess to make and their ability to stick to it. And even the ability of businesses to lobby. These are all factors that you have to take into account. So I don't actually worry so much about election year. I think businesses should just, we fail to look at history in this country. And history tells us a lot.
Has it been a useful guide for us?
It is because I don't think our historians, with all apologies and respect to them, have been quote and unquote helpful when it comes to looking at history beyond history. Let me explain what I mean by that. I've not seen anybody do a serious economic analysis of history as to if you take how the economy behaves every 4 years. Just disaggregate it from the political parties in power and look at whether there's a cycle and whether or not when these cycles happen, what it is that you notice that a lot of the historians at times comment on politics and they comment on it from more of a political angle than a historical angle. I mean, look at the impeachment of Trump going on. They bring all the historians, those who were there during Nixon and all that. Similarly, in the last downturn, the 2009 economic crisis, they looked at how the 1922 depression was solved. We don't have these things. If you look at our books in the universities, you realize that MBA and the management books you read are all based on Coca-Cola story and stories written about Amazon and all the rest. The UT.
Domino's Pizza.
The collapse of UT, the rise of UT, is a story that we need to write about. What happened to Capital Bank? What are the lessons we can learn from? What are the contextual lessons of Coco King and Wache Express? What is it that we can learn from the Kenke seller by the street side at Adabraka Ditrom, who constantly has sold Kenke over the years and there is always a queue? There are serious lessons to be learned from
Kenke
this.
Boutique.
Yeah, these are things that economists should write about, historians should write about. Then we increase the depth of knowledge based upon which we can take information and plan our businesses and the economy.
Do you think that for you, it should be, things should change? I mean, I'm asking about what should be my approach, what should be the approach for businesses, multinationals, especially in an election year, and watching the environment and acting so that they minimize the external shocks on the operations?
I think they should do 2 things. One is take an apolitical position, and 2, influence politics. And what? Yes, they must influence.
Very interesting.
Yeah, let me explain what I mean by influence politics and through business associations, etc. I'm not saying influence politics by go and donate to the political parties and ask them to appoint you, etc. But businesses should be able to come together and say, irrespective of who wins, this is what is needed for businesses to thrive. And let me give you an example. I mean, one of the most significant things which is going to happen in Africa this year from July, and I'm sure you know about that, is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. This starts July 1. Now, if you do have a free trade area and you have duty-free, tariff-free, and assuming we remove the non-tariff barriers and we are trading, then we are operating on an even keel. So if on a typical, if I bought a bottle of water from Ghana, and that bottle of water will also be exported from Kenya, I will look at the cost of input. If Kenya cost of capital is 12% and Ghana is 25%, I'm already non-competitive in terms of assets and cost to capital. If I look at power, and Ethiopia is fast becoming a manufacturing hub, and Ethiopia, the cost of power to industry is 6 cents per kilowatt hour. And Ghana, even with the removal of the capacity charge, it is still hovering around 13, 14 cents per kilowatt hour. There's a neighboring country, I think Sierra Leone or so, where power is about 30 cents per kilowatt hour. So clearly, you cannot compete when power alone is about 30% of your cost of production. So what I expect businesses to do is to be able to sit down with government and propose solutions as to how do we bring the cost of capital down? How do we bring the cost of power down? And then you send these things to the political parties and say, whoever wins, this is how we benchmark you. Because if you don't, you fall into the trap where businesses become part of political strategy. It should be the other way around. Political parties should become part of business strategy. That's actually what should be. And that's what happens in other economies. But here, the businesses have become part of political strategy.
When do you realize or draw the line or even say that, listen, this plan is not working, we need to tweak it? Because it's all about starting right and ending on a good note.
You mean a business?
A business. That when do you say that, listen, this plan is not working, we are 3 months into the year, half year, listen, we need to change this thing?
Well, that's not difficult. Any good strategy will have a benchmark which requires monitoring, and you should have a monitoring time frame. And the monitoring means you are benchmarking targets to achieve. So if it's clear the targets are not being achieved, it is not working. But if it's not working, it doesn't necessarily mean that the strategy is bad. It means probably that it did not forecast well. It means circumstances could have changed. It could mean that strategy is bad, and therefore you need to change. Now, if it happens that you do a dispassionate analysis and realize that it is not because your strategy is bad, but the context has changed to the extent that you couldn't predict, then that means you need a new strategy to respond. That's why I said, don't treat strategy as if it is God. It's just a guidepost, and you can adjust as you go along.
You mentioned the African Free Trade Area, a very, very interesting one, and also the eco as well. What should I be doing when I trade a lot with neighboring countries and all the rest, and there's some uncertainty around this whole eco thing? What should I be doing as a business person? Okay, listen, this thing is going to happen. This should be my approach, or maybe, listen, it will never happen. Businesses and the eco.
Okay, I'll answer your question from maybe a totally different angle, and that's how I've trained myself to do things. So pardon me if it's not the common way strategists look at things. There are two faults I see with most strategists and with economists, these two groups of people. And it is that they tend to look at things from, at times, a very limited perspective. Now, in life, the reality of life is that everything affects the other. So much as if you gave me to pick the 10 picks for 2020, the AFCFTA will be my number one. I do not look at AFCFTA in isolation. I look at the AFCFTA, and I'm going to answer your question, don't worry about that. I know you're talking about the ECO and the AFCFTA. I look at the AFCFTA in the context of every other thing which is happening. Because remember, this is not the first time Africa is developing a strategy like the AFCFTA. It is perhaps the most significant thing that has happened to the continent over the last 135 years, if you ask me. Because 135 years ago was when the partition of Africa happened. So an attempt to break down all the trade barriers and come together is quite significant. I mean, assuming all the 55 countries were working together, our purchase power parity is 6.6 trillion. Once that of Russia, where most of our heads of state gathered recently, is only 2.5 trillion. So, I mean, clearly, if collectively we have strong purchasing power. I can give you an example. Urban food demand in Africa alone is currently about 35,000. By 2025, it's going to hit 110 billion. It's 35 billion. It's going to hit 110 billion. These are data projections which are precise, and it is actually real. Now, if you are looking at AFCFTA in isolation, you will say, this is big opportunity. Let me take advantage of it. But that's not how a strategy should think. A strategy should think about many other things. So one, for example, can I actually export? is there a connectivity between here and where the export market is? You will find out that connectivity is limited. So how do I overcome the connectivity? Then you see that one aspect of the so-called Agenda 2063, which is perhaps equally as important as the AFCFTA, is the Africa, the connectivity, which, for example, has got flagship projects, which looks at Cape Town, Cairo, Djibouti, Dakar, etc. So that's one aspect. You will then see that a single air transport market is quite a significant part. And with a single air transport market or free movement, which only 15 countries have signed the protocol, and only 15 is needed to make it operational. But out of the 15, only 8 have ratified. Once on the AFCFTA, 28 out of the 55 have ratified. So all these are factors. Let me take you completely outside Africa. Brexit, and I'll come to the echo. Brexit, and 4 years ago, so we are in 2020, in 2016, 2 days before the election and the Brexit, as it were, referendum in the UK. I happened to be in a conference of futurists in the UK, and somebody asked, but you appear to be the only African here, if I'm right. And I said, well, I don't know. I happen to be the only black here. Maybe the other Africans here who are not. Why are you here? And I said, because Brexit is not a British problem alone. It is an African problem as well. And he was surprised. And I explained to him that, remember, if UK exits the EU, they will have to sign bilateral trade agreement with a number of people, a number of countries. Remember that the budget of the EU will drop. For example, the EU funds a lot of roads in Ghana. So funding of roads in Ghana will be affected. It affects a number of things. The EPA light which you have with the EU will be affected. Why am I saying this? I believe that France's attempt and the hurried conference with Ouattara to announce the ECO is a France strategy to react to Brexit. Because when UK exits on January 31st. Of course, it's not going to exit immediately. There's a 2-year negotiation time window and all the rest. France needs to re-strategize, and I'm talking about France in particular, because there are other countries which are particularly, key in UK, in Europe. UK is one, which has this English, former colonies they are going to be aggressively trying to negotiate with. And Germany, 2017, Germany, following the launch of the G20 Compact for Africa, Germany launched, quote and unquote, what is called a Marshall Plan for Africa. And there are German aggressive companies who are trying to enter Africa in a more, as it were, aggressive way than they used to be. Clearly, if I were France, I would strategize. So if I see Macron suddenly in Cote d'Ivoire holding a press conference with Ouattara about 8 countries and changing the ECO, I want to look beyond the announcement, because as a strategist, I'm aware that very often the news is not the main news. So what is behind the main news?
You're right on that word.
So the first question I ask is, why is the ECO that the 8 countries are moving to still pegged to the euro? And I won't go beyond that. Then I realize that then must affect the strategy of not just nations, but also of individuals who trade with those countries. Those are the things which I look at. So you must look at strategy from a 360 perspective, and not just from one narrow perspective or an announcement on the ECO. Because you may react to the ECO only to realize that there's another strategy you did not look at. So whether the ECO adoption is good or bad, whether AFCFTA is positive or negative, depends on all the other things that collectively come together to make it what it is.
In moving to the second part of the program, I want us to be looking into the crystal ball and whether externality should also impact on whatever that we do. Because someone are also saying that as a business, think global and act local. So if things are happening in Nigeria, if things are happening in the global space and all the rest, should you care about that one as a business, or listen, oh, it's Ghana, let's just focus on what is happening in Ghana here?
Strategy depends on a number of things. First, I've already told you that it depends on context, and that culture is actually more important than strategy. So it depends on culture also. But there's another part of strategy which is key. It depends on the rank of the ladder you occupy. So if you are a small business in some corner, you sell in front of your house, yeah, you should listen to the news and bother about it, but you should not draw a strategic plan for whether Trump is going to be impeached or not. I mean, it may not necessarily be required. You may want to focus on what is happening in Ghana and whether or not the AMA is going to ban people from selling on the street, or you are going to pull down kiosks. It's important to your strategy. It's very important. I don't know if you know the coconut seller somewhere around Northridge, whose shop was pulled down.
Yeah,
I think it took Jerry Rollins to bring it back, etc. Yeah, that's part. His whole strategy for the year was affected by AMA's action which
to keep the city clean.
I mean, so you must care about AMA more than what is happening in Europe, because of the rank of the ladder you occupy. But if you were MTN, or if you were APSA, and if let's say there is a UK is moving out of, and at the same time Barclays PLC is moving out of Africa, and you look at the terrain, your strategy as APSA is totally going to be different. If you my friend's company, Tropical Cable, and you manufacture cables, and suddenly Africa is open, and we'll say cables are added into the 5,000 basket of goods under the AFCFTA, then I will look at it. And I will not just look at it there, just to end on that point. I will look at what China, for example, is doing. Are they producing cable cheaper than I'm producing? Will Djibouti to Dakar Railway and Ghana acceding to the Belt and Road Initiative lead to the influx of Chinese cables? I don't know. These are all things that I will look at. So it depends on the rank of the ladder you occupy.
If you've just joined us, the program is a business edition of PM Express, and we are looking at strategizing for the year. How do you start this right and end it on a good note? Remember, you can also join us in this program or discuss in terms of on a various social media platform, the Joy News platform, with your views and comments. And when we come back, we're going to look at the crystal ball, and they have a Ofosu-Dorte's firm, that is AD David, has a wonderful program where they look into the crystal ball to tell us what should we be expecting for the rest of the year. We'll take a short break and we will be right back. Welcome back to the business edition of PM Express as we discuss strategy. How do you plan, start well so you end on a good note? And talk about planning and strategy. There's a program that always happens. So the Africa Ball that AB and David puts together that, I understand. No, help me out. Why is this program so critical for every business when it comes to planning and looking into this crystal ball?
Actually, it started initially as something we were doing for just our clients, and then our clients just brought other people, and I mean, this year will be 7th year.
Wow.
Yeah, and by the time we got to his 5th year, 150 people were attending. Last year, 250 people were there, and these people come from all over the world. It's not just Ghana. Last year, we had 17 countries represented. I mean, it's because we discussed not just strategy as a whole. We discuss the key events we see based on insights that we do know as we observe, and we bring experts from across the continent who look basically at Africa and nothing more than Africa, and what world events portend for Africa. So it is important that you do have right insights and benchmark it with what you are developing to see, and these things really do happen. Some of the predictions are very precise. 9 out of 10 predictions last year happened.
Tell me more.
I mean, last year as an example, and one of your sister stations kept talking about it because they had the video, and this is not prophecy. I don't speak to God. Like, this is predictions based on history and based on trends that we see. So, for example, we predicted that Theresa May was going to exit and that he will not last beyond 30th June. There was a big uproar, and I said if Theresa May goes beyond 30th June, that was going to be a surprise. We predicted a general election. It was precise. People had the handouts. We predicted Modi was going to win in India. We predicted Buhari was going to win in Nigeria. All these things happened. But it's not just that. We predicted how these events will have a direct impact on Africa. That we reserve it for the crystal ball. You have to be there to understand what this really means. And I can assure you about something. Anybody who has been to crystal ball once never want to miss it. That's you can speak to anybody who has ever attended.
Who can be at this program?
Anybody at all who is in the business sector. So it's meant for business leaders. And it's not just, I mean, when I say business leaders, I'm not talking about multinationals or formal organizations. Anybody who does business. It's as simple as that. You are qualified to attend. And this year in particular, Crystal Ball focuses entirely on the free trade agreement. The reason is simple, because when we pick, and we always pick the biggest, the 10 benchmarks that we have to monitor. And we monitor this and then drill in to make predictions. So what I'm talking about is not the predictions, but the areas to watch. And when we drilled, the top 10 came down to the top 5, came down to the top 3. The AFCFTA was the most important. So we decided to focus on it, and we are bringing the people who really matter. The Commissioner for Trade himself is going to be here. Muchanga is the keynote speaker. Prudence, the people who put the CFTA together. So we are going to talk about what are the payment systems. If you export to Cote d'Ivoire, what are you going to get, eco or dollar? And what platforms can you export on? When does trade start? What goods goes into the trade basket? There are 5,000 goods which are traded across Africa. Are all of them going to be tariff-free, duty-free? When does it start? So, for example, somebody has to explain the so-called 93-7 rule and when it applies. What are the country strategies? What goes into it? And I'll give you just one hint. I believe you saw Nigeria close its borders. Nigeria had not ratified the CFTA yet. And everybody said Nigeria has closed its borders, etc., to Benin, etc. Okay. I don't know whether this is Nigeria's strategy or not, but there is an unintended effect at times. What am I talking about? I'm talking about rice. Just rice. Suddenly, Ghana had excess production of rice because of planting for food and jobs. It would be good to export this rice because once we open the market, and I've already said that, you have a market of urban food demand growing from 35 billion to 110 billion. But can we export rice? The answer is not very easy to say. Because under the rules, you can put 7% of your goods into a sensitive area and 3% into a no-go area. The remaining 90% is open. Now let's deal with just rice. Assuming Ghana decided that we wanted to protect rice, the rules of origin and the rules of trade will not allow us to do that. Because it says that to the extent that you are still making a significant import of that good, that particular item for which you already have an advantage, then you cannot protect it. Now let's look at Nigeria. Nigeria's closure of its border has changed the story about Nigeria rice. Nigeria's import of rice is almost zero. So assuming Nigeria and Ghana are competing about rice, Nigeria can export, whilst we may not be able to export. So a closure of a border may be a rice strategy, unintended.
Mr. Ofosu-Dorte, just in 30 seconds, what is the board saying about how Ghana is really going to benefit from this free trade thing?
Which board?
The board.
We're looking into the crystal ball.
What is it saying about the benefit that it will bring to Ghana?
It depends on how well we plan and how well we take advantage of the huge advantage we have. We do have a huge advantage. Location is one. Not only location of Ghana as an equidistant position to be able to trade across the rest of Africa, but location of the HQ itself is also important. But everything depends on whether our businesses can produce the goods. And lastly, many people forget that this also covers services. Services is part. So our ability to strategize to take advantage of it is what is key. You have 1.3 billion people and a potential 6.6 trillion market. Taking advantage of it is what is key.
I think we need to do a part 2 of strategy and then crystal ball. I mean, I think we have to do that. So if he agrees, he'll join us again in studio for us to talk about more about strategy. Well, also we have to draw the curtain down. Time runs fast when it's getting interesting. And the Ofosu-Dorte, Sudebi and David, interesting discussion. And it's a program I'm going to be at the crystal ball. So I think you should also be there to learn more about strategy.
16th January.
16th January to
16th January. One day, 8 a.m.
Okay, so also draw the curtain down. Remember, this has been Business Edition of PM Express. My name is George, and all the best and Happy New Year.